The last section is know the contract and process. So, we did the people and database first. We did the market and marketing on that second one. And now this is the contract and the process. And so the first slide here is to be the guide, right? Like we want to be the Mr. Miyagi and let our clients be, Daniel's son in the process. One of my favorite movies, just by the way. All right, well, let's talk about this piece, how to spot a bad agent. This is not an article that we've written. And what it really talks about are a couple of things. If dropping the ball in communication, if you find yourself waiting hours or days for your agent to return, calls, texts, communication, that's one of the ways they state it. And then a style that doesn't mesh well with you. And if the agent tends to sugarcoat situations. So if you really think about those three things and what they really boil down to, it's being responsive, being professional, and being honest with your clients, right? And so if you're new, sometimes it can be tough to think about being honest with your clients and saying, we that list of 50 homes that you have, there's no way that we can go look at 50 homes in one weekend. And plus you're not going to remember 50 homes. And so you have to think about those ways and think about some of the things that we're talking about now. You are the guide. You are the person that they're coming to help, or that you've requested that you're able to help them. And so you have to set this up for them, right? And so that's one way to do that piece. The style part, we talked about the disc profiles, so how you mesh with them, and then returning their calls and text, having something. It doesn't have to be that you're always 24/7 watching your phone, waiting for their text message or phone call. But in some ways, be responsive. If you're going to be out for a little while, put an out of office or one of the auto responders on your text messages, or change your voicemail or whatever, so that they're not thinking that you're just not replying to them, right? We'll look at a quick look at a buyer roadmap. Everyone knows the typical process, or the hope process that we would love for a buyer to take. Choosing you as the agent, getting pre-approved for a loan. Does anyone want to touch on what the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval of a loan is for everyone, just in case there's someone here that is newer? This is a buyer roadmap that happens in every one of your buyer situations, right? It goes just like this, A to Z, and everyone's always happy, right? Well, no, we know that is not the case. A lot of times it starts with, they view the home, then they decide what they want and need, and then it's get pre-approved, and then it's choosing as an agent, and then maybe into the offer negotiation phase. But backing up really quick to that pre-approval, obviously it is important on a lot of levels. One level for the almost all of them are for the client, right? It's buying power, purchasing power for them. It's knowing that that's there. Also with contingencies in the contracts being very hit or miss, or the seller's requesting no of this contingency. Well, if they're pre-approved, technically, there can be 0 days finance contingency. Obviously, your buyer needs to know what that means. They need to know that that is a big liability for their earnest money. But technically, there can be that situation, right, where they have that. If they go through the Not Go program, not only can they have the pre-approval to be able to do that, but also the appraisal gap difference clause that is in there for not to be able to make up all of that or some of that difference if the appraisal comes in low. So with that one, you actually kind of get a couple of things built in: the pre-approval through that process, and then that appraisal gap coverage. So the point of that is it's in today's market, like D-Rose said, if you go in with an offer and there's a pre-qual, and then there's 5 offers with all pre-approvals, yours is, unless the terms were just outrageous from what you put on there, you're probably at the bottom of the pile. So you're not really setting your client up for success. And your client may give you pushback on that. You have to let them know why it's that important, especially in today's market, to be able to do that. So it takes a little more work on their end. It's not that, hey, let's go look at 10 homes this afternoon and I haven't started anything with a lender. It's we'll go look at some homes, but let's start this ASAP, because if we find a home that you like, we're already behind the 8 ball, because someone else has already gotten their pre-approvals. Someone else is already looking at that home fully ready to go. And if we don't do that, and we decide on Saturday at 7 p.m. that we need to write an offer, the chances of us getting something in before the deadline Sunday morning at 9 a.m. is going to be pretty tough. And we don't want to be against that. And plus, your time is valuable too. And so, we want to make sure that everyone's involved in that. Initial buyer consultations can go a lot of different ways, but essentially it's a meet and greet, learning about buyer goals, whether it's at the property you're first showing them or at a coffee house or something like that, where you're actually able to sit down and have a conversation. And then the ultimate thing is, how do we help them with their goal, right? What are their goals? What do they need from this? And so if you just remember the 80-20 rule, in this 80-20 rule, it's 80% about them and 20% about you. We all know, we all know that there are a lot of personalities in real estate, and a lot of it can be, hey, I've sold 1 billion homes, and you should use me. I'm on the cover of HGTV and all this stuff. But really, again, back to that WIFM, what's in it for that client? Sure, it might be great that you have these accolades, but really, they're caring about what you care about them, right? How are you going to help them meet their goals? So this hot market, this is kind of like a just this hot market slide, but having a plan, right? And that's how we just talked about with the pre-approval that Rosie was talking about, is talking to your client about, we've got a plan. I have a plan for us to be able to maximize our time in this market today. And one of them is to have that pre-approval, right? I'm going to email you those properties like we just talked about. When something hits the market, you're going to get notified ASAP. If you see something you like, text me immediately, call me immediately. Let's go look at that property, right? We have to jump on it. And we have the pre-approval in place already, right? So now we're ready to go. And then, so that you don't have this be a hurdle when they're ready to go, reviewing a contract with them and terms, right? The worst thing that happens is you've done all of this hard stuff, gotten them helped them get pre-approved. Now they're getting properties. You go see a property, they say, this is the one, let's write this contract right now. How do I do it? What does that mean? Oh, explain this to me, right? Because maybe you have that C personality who wants to go through every single line, and now the contract's due that night and you're having to explain a 13-page contract line by line. So the example here is to have that all happen at the beginning, right? This may all take 30 minutes at an initial consultation. It can be after you show them a property. It can be as you're at having coffee or whatever the situation is. But if you have this up front, it will save you way more time, because obviously they're going to be emotional about that property. You're going to be rushing through like, oh, I got to get this offer in. And then now they're like, well, what does that mean on page 3? What does this mean? And also, of course, you want them to understand what all of this means, because if they're putting down any sort of earnest money, and in today's market, we know it can be a lot, we want them to understand the ramifications of those contingencies being low or off or 0 or 1 or whatever. So, yes, it's extra work up front, but just like you would explain the buyer brokerage agreement, you're going to explain a purchase and sell agreement so that you do not have to do that at the time. Plus, think about this scenario. We already talked about how many homes you've shown to people. There were some people in the chat that said they showed property and the client decided not to buy. Now, they probably just decided not to buy now. Maybe a year from now, they decide to buy. But what do you think they're going to remember if you do stuff like this at the beginning, right, with them, rather than, hey, if once we write a contract, we'll go over all that. If you do it at the beginning, they're going to remember, wow, they went over all of that with me already. There's no way I'm using another agent, because my agent in 2021 or early 2022 already went through everything. Now we just have to find a property, and now I'm ready to go. So, you're setting yourself up for success, and it's your professional system, that you have. So the last part of that is reviewing, like we said, the appraisal, other contingencies, what the earnest money means, when they may get earnest money back and when they may not, when due diligence is going to be, if due diligence is required to be waived, what that means. I heard an agent say, a very successful agent say, in this market, with a lot of the due diligences coming into question, you may suggest to your client, hey, do you know anyone who's a builder or who has experience with homes? You may want to take them with you to look at property with us, because you're involved too, to look at property, right? And of course, it's not an inspection, but at least if they're going to waive due diligence and they're comfortable with it and they understand the earnest money side of that, which backing up all of this, just like Seth and Ned Blumenthal would say, get that in writing, right? That they understand if they're waiving due diligence and finance and appraisal, all of that, that their earnest money is likely up for grabs, right? And so having that just in an email where it can't be like, you never told me I was going to lose $10 to $20 to $40,000 of earnest money. So yeah, so that was a this market thing. Now we'll kind of get back into the groove of working with the buyers. These are sample questions. You'll have this on a slide. What city? These are the facts, right? These are the facts for the client. What city? Bed, bath, schools. You need to be close. Is move-in ready? Or are you okay fixing things up when you move in? Maybe it needs just carpet and paint, or are they okay replacing the kitchen cabinets if needed? And then are you open to new construction? And what are the top things you might have? Again, these are facts. There's a whole list of these you can ask based on your client, but that's the fact side. Now, the lifestyle side, like we talked about a little bit earlier, is maybe a bigger piece depending on the person. They may say, I need 4-bed, 3-bath, but their lifestyle tells you they need 5-bed because they need 2 offices at home, right? They've got 4 total people and they need 2 home office, right? All of those things are going to come into this, but what do you like to do in your downtime? You like to cook at home. That might be something, right? Maybe they didn't prior to the shutdowns, and now they love to cook because they've done it. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they used to love to cook and now they've eaten so much of their own they don't want to anymore. Whatever the answers are, just think about these types of questions. Do you work from home? Do you like to entertain and barbecue and do all of these other things? What are your hobbies? Do you have animals? Do you need fenced in yards? But more driven not from the how many bed and bath do you need? How many of this? Because sometimes they don't know. We talked about that earlier when y'all were working with some of your clients. You're like, they told me they needed this, and then they moved, 40 miles away. They told me they needed this, and they bought a completely different house. We looked at that, didn't we, on those stats, where it showed, what they ultimately compromised on, right? Was all of these things. And so, again, you're the expert, but what these 2 slides will do is save them and you time when you're in this process. Which leads back to the dollars per hour when you really, compute all of that, right? So we want to make sure that we're maximizing everyone's time in this whole process. So representation, we all know what an exclusive buyer brokerage agreement is, and we all know how important it is, right, to the entire process, because not only does it lay out a lot of fine details on how you'll be compensated, or the broker will be compensated, but it also lays out the relationship between you and the broker and the client, and ultimately what information can be shared. And so, really, when you read through this, and if you have never read through this, please do. This is one of the most important ones, along with the purchase and sell and the listing agreement, that you could possibly know in real estate. But obviously the buyer brokerage agreement is very important for you to have established very, very early in the process, not at closing, not at offer time, if you can at all help it, because it really does just establish everything. So recommendations there are for a 1-year buyer brokerage agreement. You may have buyers, and this will be pre-printed like number 2 says on here, right? So pre-printed before you go meet that client, everything's filled out except for their signatures on the last page. And so you're going in with that already there. And if they say, I'm not comfortable with this being for a year, then now you have a dialogue. Now you have a question. Okay, well, let's do 6 months, right? In this market, it's very tough. I'm willing to do 6 months. And so you strike through that and you put 6 months. If you put 30 days on here, you're never gonna increase it to a year from there. But you don't want the client to have to have thoughts of like, well, why didn't they just put a week, right? Because in this market, it could be 3 months, 6 months. You find a new construction property once they come back in town for the second time. Why not just have something there? Obviously, there is a way for this agreement to be broken if you're not doing what you said you're going to do to this client. But pre-printing the info, explaining and reviewing, and that's probably the number 1 rebuttal, right? Is, well, I need to take it home to read it. If they take it home and read it, that's great. They may understand the information, but while you're there as the real estate expert, you do want to review this document with them. Go line by line. If they say, I don't understand that, well, let's talk about it. This section says this term is this is what this piece means. Go through it. You do have to know it beforehand. And Derek has a great contracts class where he reviews this and the purchase and sell agreement. But reviewing this with your client, again, is like reviewing that purchase and sale agreement. You're setting everything up so that at time of offer, you're not sending this and an offer and they've never seen either document. And if they're that C personality, they're going to say, timeout, I need tomorrow to review everything. And then now the deadline's passed for that property to be bid on or offered on. And, they're like, all right, well, let's go look at property number 12 because we missed that one because I didn't take time to explain this to you or bring it up, right? I know life happens, things happen, but if you can at all, put all of this at the beginning of your process again, it's just going to save time. Showing property, there's a lot more to this, but if you kind of break it into arriving early, when you meet and greet your client, greeting them, warm welcomes, and then rating the home. So, most agents do the top two. Some agents do the last one. I would argue that last one is probably one of the most important, especially if you're going through that whole list of maybe you got to 5 properties that Saturday of the 10 or 20 that they narrowed it down to. And so now as you're leaving property 1, okay, great. Maybe you have a husband, wife buyer or 2 or more people. Either way, you want to say, okay, buyer 1, what did you rate this home? 1 through 10, 10 being the best, a 7. Okay. And then the other person, what did you rate it? Okay, a 6. And you just go down the line, right? Now you go see another property and another property, another one, but you're keeping record of what they told you as they left that property, what they rank it. Now, at the end of the day, they've looked at 5, 10, whatever number of properties, and you say, okay, great. It looks like we have a property that rated a 9 and a property that rated an 8, for both of you. Let's go look at those 2 properties real quick if you need to before we put in any offers. But what this saves you is them saying, oh, I really love property number 2. And you go find your rankings and it says a 5 and a 6. And you say, but you rated it a 5 and you rated it a 6. What do you remember about that? Oh, yeah, maybe I didn't like that kitchen counter or whatever was in there, right? So again, saving you time, also being the professional and making sure that you're not having to go look at 10 properties over again because 10 properties can get daunting to look at in one day, right? So that's what that rate the homes part is. Tools for showing homes, showing time or some kind of online booking. There's a lot of different ones that are out there now, but showing time is the most prevalent. And so you can book, request, a showing there. If you cannot get a reply on that showing time, text the agent, call the agent. The goal here is to get in there if your client wants to see that property. And sometimes there are agents who are not as responsive. And so it may not be a case of that property's under contract or whatever. It just may be a case that they're not as responsive. And so you have to, continuously try to do that. So showing time request, text message, you're going to need an e-key, obviously, to show the property. If you're brand new and you don't have this, let me know and we can show you how to do that. It's also in the onboarding we have here at Solid Source. And then having a tablet, that you can write on or type on and paper so you can do the rankings. So you can talk to your clients about what they really liked about that property. Because if that Saturday you looked at 5 and that's the first time you've ever visited with that client and been together looking at property, you've probably made some notes about what they really like and what they really don't like about properties. And so now when you're set up to go out on Sunday and look at 5 additional, you probably have a new set of criteria in your head. And you may say, listen, the last 2 we were going to look at, based on what we looked at today, do not fit anywhere near what you initially told me, right? So you're, again, just refining so that you're not just showing properties to show property, right? We all know that we can open doors, we can talk about properties. We don't need to do it just for practice, unless you just want to do it for practice. What to look for. This is what your buyers are going to look at. Oh, wow, look at that kitchen, look at the countertops. But you as an agent, you're probably going to be a little more focused on, is the roof 25 years old? Are the windows 25 years old? Is the plumbing leaking? And I saw it on the seller's property disclosure. And so you're going to have to know that, right? If you haven't shown a ton of property, then you're going to find out that buyers aren't typically looking at all of those things, especially first-time home buyers. So a little kind of guide here, rough guide, right? Because all situations are different. But the roof, you've got 3-tab shingles and architectural shingles. Architectural shingles typically last longer. The quality is typically a little bit better. So knowing that, if you have a house that's 25 years old and the roof's never been replaced and it's 3-tab, it's probably at the end of its life cycle. HVAC can be 10 to 20 years based on the manufacturer, the warranty, all of that stuff. Water heater, rough gauge, 8 to 12 years. Windows, if they're wood, 15 to 20 years. Obviously, vinyl's longer, and certain manufacturers, if it's kept up with and painted every year, can be longer. These are very, very basic overall guidelines, but just want to show you that probably your client is not thinking about these things when they're visiting that property. They're thinking about that pretty kitchen counter or whatever else that they really want on the property. 3-tab, shingle septic systems can be very, very expensive if they're not maintained, to repair, replace, diagnose. And so, if you check a property and it's on septic and your client's never bought a property before, you might want to educate yourself just a little bit enough to speak to them about what a septic system is and what it looks like, and what that means for them potentially as a homeowner. And you want to check the seller's property disclosure to see if it's been pumped out and cleaned on any sort of regular basis, because if it's 10 years old or 20 years old and it's never been cleaned out, they're in trouble, and they will have to dedicate some money to that if the seller's not willing to change the sales price or have it inspected before it closes or something like that. Hot water heaters, obviously, what that looks like. Windows, fogged windows, are not an R value, killer, right? They're not just sucking the air out of there. It is more of a cosmetic issue. Yes, there's a small, R value, or I forget the other value, they call it E value or something that's lost there. But it's more of a cosmetic thing. And so you may have a buyer who says, I love this property, but there's 5 fogged windows. It's going to cost $1 million to fix that. And so just explaining to them and knowing, right, that is not a huge issue. And a lot of these things you'll learn. I know there's some experienced people here. I'm more talking to newer. As you go to those inspections that your buyers are under contract with, you'll learn a lot of this stuff through those inspectors. A lot of them are extremely helpful at the end of the process of saying, hey, when you have questions of saying, hey, that's a fog window, what does that mean? Hey, this is whatever, what does that mean? They're very, very helpful at that. So ask questions, of them to be able to help gain your experience. Mold, it can be a small issue, it can be a really big issue. Depends on where it is, what type of mold it is, if it's airborne, if it's surface. So those are all things that could potentially be a big deal. And then HVAC systems, right? On the seller's property disclosure, there's a place for the age of the HVAC. A lot of times they've either had like a compressor or an evaporator replaced, but that's 2 components of the system, right? If they say AC replaced in 2018, you may want to check it as you're walking through that property to see the serial numbers on there, if they were both replaced, or did the seller just say, I don't know, something was replaced, I thought it was the whole system, right? It might not have been the entire system. So yes, the seller may have messed up on the seller's property disclosure, but you'd probably rather know at the beginning of the offer rather than after your client moves in that they messed up. So those are just some ideas. Obviously, there's tons more to a home. You can't know everything, and on our purchase and sale agreement, it says that much, that you're not an inspector, you're not a contractor. But if you can add a little bit of value for your client through that process, they're going to be thankful for that. These are just a few tips when you're writing the offer. Call and speak to the listing agent before the offer goes in, asking things like anything else we need to know about the home. What's the seller's time frame to sell? Yes, we know purchase price is huge in this market, but there are also a lot of other terms that might be heavily favorable for a seller. The big one that we're seeing a lot is that the seller wants to sell today and stay in that property for 30 days while they move or transition out. If you don't know that before you put the offer in, and you don't even have a plan to combat that, maybe your buyer says no, but at least going into that offer, and your buyer knows that's what the seller's looking for. So now when you come back and whatever the answer is to your buyer, maybe it's no because they didn't want to do that, then at least you told them at time of offer, rather than, hey, I found out that they wanted a temporary occupancy agreement. And maybe if you didn't bring it up, your buyer may have said, that's fine with me. I understand what that means, and I want this home so bad, I don't care. And so the only way you find that out is at the beginning. I know listing agents can be tough to get a hold of right now. I'm not telling you that this is, tried and true for 100%, but if you can at all get any of their time, these are the questions you want to ask. Feedback on there. Thanks for letting them show the property. You're again trying to be and show how knowledgeable, professional, and responsive you are to that agent, right? You want them to know that when you're involved in this process of going under contract, when they select your offer, that you're going to be knowledgeable, professional, and responsive to them to help make things easier, on their side from that standpoint. You're still negotiating for your client, but that you're going to make sure that you're responsive and professional with the feedback to them. Contingencies, these are typical market contingencies, not today contingencies, but in a great market, balanced market, you've got 7 to 14 days. Obviously, your buyer can terminate for really any reason under that due diligence period. But that is the time, if you can have any due diligence period, where the inspection and any other, the general inspection and any other specific inspections, right? If the HVAC is 25 years old and never been replaced, maybe you mentioned to your client, well, you would want to mention to your client on the under contract kickoff email, which we already have printed up for you, that they may want a pool inspection, septic, roof, all these other things. If there's something else on the property, that's unique to that property, you would want to include that. But these are responsibilities for your buyer to be able to get and pay for. Financing in a balanced market, 21-28, appraisal, same thing. Financing, obviously, we talked about a little bit earlier with the pre-approval. That's going to help speed up that time frame. And so you always want to ask the lender, how many days do you need for a finance appraisal? If they've already had the pre-approval in hand, it could be 0. Again, go over the rules with your clients about what that means. Appraisal, we already talked about that too. So now you're under contract. You're going to congratulate, send them that email that we already have uploaded on the Vision. You can send whatever you want, but on that email, it outlays their next steps: earnest money, scheduling the home inspection. And so that's already on there for you. Always recommend multiple vendors on the home inspection. That's our tip to you, is because the moment you say, hey, call my friend Jeff, he's the best, and then one client, in a little bit has a problem with Jeff, now it's going to be like, hey, you told me to use Jeff and he missed all these things on this inspection. What are you going to do? And just avoid those conversations. You can say, Jeff, it's highly recommended from a lot of clients, but so are these other companies. Here you go. Or there's Google, whatever you feel comfortable with. I would recommend a few. Add contingency dates to your calendar and set up a meeting invite with your client too, right? So how you can set a, remind me on my calendar, but also you can put someone else's email in there and send it. Do that for your clients for due diligence ending, finance contingency ending, and set a reminder out on everybody's for 2 days prior, right? So that when their earnest money is due, they get a reminder 2 days before and they see it on their calendar. Earnest money due this date, and you see it on your calendar. And then the same thing for finance, appraisal, closing, any key important dates that happen in that contract, you can have set up as a reminder for them and for you on calendars. You would check in with the lender. Obviously, you'll send them a copy of the contract when you go under contract, and check in and make sure that they have everything that they want and that they need from the client. Sometimes you do have to help them get things or spur along the client. So you definitely want to be involved there. Schedule the closing. You do take care of that. Sometimes, that can be overlooked as a new agent because maybe you didn't understand that piece, but you do want to schedule that closing as early as possible, right? Towards the end of the month, the closing attorneys get really, really booked. A lot of people try to get that closing in right there, right before on the 31st or the 30th, whatever the last day of the month is. So be very careful if you haven't scheduled the closing yet and you're trying to get something in a couple of days towards the end of the month. It may not happen. So that's why it's important to do that. And then you want to drag and drop your contract into Vision. The contract kickoff email looks like this. It's in Vision. And so we'll show you where to find that. You can use whatever you want, but this is one we've already put together. Essentially, it's just a template. You fill out anywhere the gray boxes are, congratulating the buyer. They're now under contract to purchase a home at this address. Here are the dates. Here are your next steps. And so it puts everything kind of in a nice little neat package. Scheduling the closing we talked about at Weissman, how to do that. And then you have a final walk and closing. Now, I think Timmy and I have had this conversation before, but anyone else, how many final walkthroughs are there? So 1 or 2 is the question, right? I mean, this is up to you. This is up to your clients, but I strongly recommend, like Donna put up 2, I strongly recommend 2. One, if you think about it like this, you're going to closing at 11 a.m. this morning. Hopefully you've scheduled at a closing attorney that's semi-close to that property. Weissman's got so many locations, you're probably going to hit one on the way. So before closing, 11 o'clock closing today, let's go by at 10. Final walk the property for the final walk. Now, the seller may have moved out. Let's see, today's Friday. The seller may have moved out Wednesday. Whatever happened in between repairs at the beginning of the contract and Wednesday, we want to go check on that, right? Make sure that the roof got repaired or whatever. And you may actually go out before that if they've already moved out of the property, but you'd like for all of their stuff to be out so you can see it, see the floors, see everything that was covered up maybe by furniture. And so that's your first final walk. I know final is one. And then you go for your second final walk right before, and hopefully it's not going to be that long. You're just verifying that, the rain that came through or the wind that came through or whatever, could have happened between the time you last were out there and the time of closing, that the property's still in the same condition. And you can go out for that last final walkthrough right before closing. But the problem is if you find that the mover scratched the floors or made a hole in the wall, or the sellers didn't repair the things they said they repaired, now what do? Closing's in an hour. Really, the only thing you can do is recommend to your client that we don't close. Now, maybe they also have a home to sell and it's a double close. I mean, there's so many bad things that can happen that 1 hour, 2 or 3 or 4 days before the second final walkthrough can solve. You've got time. You can talk to that other agent and the sellers and say, listen, we see where this happened. We need to, or this didn't get repaired, like you said, got repaired. We're going to need to figure out something to amend the conversation, to amend the contract. So you just have time, right? That's what that gives you. So that's where my opinion on 2 works. And so, or a tree falls, so many things, right? We've all seen it. We've all been on a final walkthrough and seen something, right? Right before closing, right? Like something happened in the property and your buyer is freaking out. Closing's in an hour. What do you do? And now you're at the closing table. It's contentious, and we're not going to fix that. And why? Let's try to avoid that as much as possible, right? So, all right, spent too much time on that, but just wanted to really hit it. Closing, you'll get a clear to close. You'll see it. The lender will call it CTC or clear to close. Those are fantastic words to hear. That means you're ready to go. The buyer's ready to go. They're ready to close on that property. You might get it 2 days before. You might get it the morning of closing. Whenever you get it, it's great news. So you want to arrive early, cheer on your buyer. Gifts and cards are optional, but it does go a long way, especially if there are 2 agents in the room, buyer, seller agents, and buyers and sellers, and you're the agent who's giving some form of a gift. It doesn't have to be elaborate to your clients, and the other side isn't. Maybe you've got a potential future client there on the other side. Pictures and reviews, reviewing all documents prior. The closing attorney should send those out. If you don't see preliminary statements before closing, I wouldn't wait 30 minutes before closing. So the day before, you should be able to get a preliminary statement. Just go through and make sure purchase price looks right, earnest money looks right, commission amount looks right, all of that stuff, right? So you're just checking that off before you get in there. And if you have never reviewed a settlement statement and you're unsure, our in-house attorney, Hema, used to be a closing attorney at Weissman, and she has a video on solidsourcechannel.com where she reviews it line by line. Now, that video is in depth, but if you have never been to a closing and don't know that form, you'll watch that video and say, I'm an expert now. And so now when you get this closing docs, you'll be able to review it and really help your clients there. Plus you'll know it, right? I mean, we all want to know what's happening there. And then the follow-up side. So contacting your client, a week after, right? They bought that property, they moved in. Hey, just want to check in, see how things are going. Again, this is building that long-term relationship with them. It's a great time then to ask for referrals, and we talked about what to say. This is just the short and sweet, anyone looking to buy or sell, but really you're asking those questions we asked earlier. If they would recommend you to a friend or family if they were looking to buy or sell, and then sending them a CMA or something, a handwritten card on their home anniversary, right? It's a great time now if you had a buyer a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, to be able to send them a CMA today and say the value of your home is skyrocketed. If you're ever thinking about selling, I'd love to come over and give you a more accurate CMA. Great speaking with you or whatever. But sending that a physical thing in the mail If you're really technically inclined, you love technology, there's a way to do that where you record, where you build the CMA, right, through Cloud CMA, and then you record yourself like on a Zoom, reviewing that Cloud CMA, and then you send that video to them, or you have a virtual meeting where you review it. So a lot of different ways you can do that, but the whole point is just keeping in touch and giving them that information. So these are the ends of our presentation, but I want to go over with the downloads that we're going to give to you inside of Vision so that you know what's there. This is one of my favorites. Success is where preparation and opportunity meet. So, you know, we talked about the process. We talked about having all of that in place. And so now when that opportunity comes, you're ready for that success. We have a new buyer checklist that's in Vision. So if you're a checklist person like I am, then you can go through here. You can see form numbers on what offer forms you would want to use. And when you're under contract, kind of what the next steps are there. What do you want to schedule after that? There's even ones like check with the lender on the dates, review the inspection report with the buyer. So we try to break it out as much as possible on step by step. Obviously, every transaction is different. This does not incorporate every single transaction you'll ever have in real estate on the buy side, but it's a great starting point. And if you have any questions about any of these things, you can always contact me or the broker team and say, hey, I see this is, part of the process. What really does that mean? I've got a buyer in stage 2 and I'm thinking about already stage 4. What does that mean, right? We obviously want to help you understand that so that when that time comes, you can help your clients. It even goes through resources at the bottom. So sample contracts package down here. All you have to do is click on that, and there's an actual GAR contracts package that we filled out for training purposes. So if you've never filled out a GAR contract or you just want a refresher, you can go there, download those documents, and see one filled out like a fake, sample contract to be able to go through there. There's a final walkthrough checklist in there and the buyer kickoff email. So you'll have all of this inside of a document inside of Vision. We also have closing best practices that are listed in there. So again, if you just want to have a general overview of how the closing goes, that's what you'll see inside of this document in Vision. And then a transaction checklist. So this is not just for buyers, but if you have a residential purchase, sell, the closing and commission document. So this is for GAR or RE forms. If you're using the RE forms in FMLS, you've got that here, or you've got the GAR numbers. All of that's here. And then again, some more resources down at the end. Working with buyers, working with seller PDFs. So there's a lot of information inside of here that you'll have access to, but that's what those pieces are.